Actually, I have been handsome and popular all my life. There has always been something wrong with my face. Look in the mirror, Stevie, my mother said, holding me up so I could see my face. See? There's Stevie. The little ears stuck out. That was the first thing I noticed, the two ears. And though the hair was pasted down with suave and brushed neatly into a regular boy's hairdo, a few springy locks had popped loose. Curly hair. Ugh! The nose was a pale blob of cold putty. Had the police already gotten to me? No, I was born like that. At 2, my face already looked like the face of a convict. But the eyes and chin were pretty. Pretty. It's midnight and the sunglasses twirl. My injuries, a deaf plant warped in a Hollywood rockery of juice cans and hypodermic needles. So cool, baby, you don't know what you need. Oh. Sick animal glare in the skin of the pavement. Oh, I do want to go down right here where they threw the mop head, the paper towels and rubbers. Got a no-no whistle is all. You can't make music with that. Movie inside as big as the wall of a building and so bright it'd make you throw up, but they watch it, the men, and they eat and they drink and they eat and they drink. Actually, it is not just the two of us, her and me. There are the cops and me and her, and the good-for-nothing windows, brown suits and gray suits and blue suits, cars that stop and ones that go. There are palm trees and people leaning on the palm trees, scratching, reading, looking at the trash, which is empty, believe me, from being looked at. There's a TV set in a window. It says, "The stars are coming out."
Hi, come on in. I've been expecting you.
Well, we had love problems, Jesse, not with each other, but with other people, and we used to talk about it at great length, because the trick is always to not hate, I guess, and that's one of the things that he kind of taught me, but he knew enough about guns anyway, so that when I bought this Magnum and joined a gun club, he was more than willing to come out to the range with me and shoot the gun. It's a really nice gun, actually. This is a Smith & Wesson. Anyway, we drive out to the Continental Sportsman out in Edmonds, which is a gun club. You can have a gun here. You move here, you get to have a gun. And we'd sit in the car, and he'd be just weeping and saying, "I don't know what to do, Susie. I don't know if it's going to work. I just don't know if it's going to work." I'd say, "Yeah, I know, me too. Let's shoot." What Jesse did was he had this unique way. He'd say, "I have this other way of aiming, see?" And we'd send the target down the lane, and he would stand there. He couldn't straighten his legs because he had polio when he was a kid. And he would start the gun up here, and then he would bring it down. And as the front sight passed the target, he'd pull one off the trigger, and he almost never hit the damn thing. But everybody in the place got a real big kick out of it.
All week long, we've been celebrating the best of Seattle from the Seattle Weekly Readers Poll. We know that this city has great restaurants and great espresso and great landmarks and traffic reporters and musicians. Did you know we also have some great poets? Well, Jesse Bernstein has been voted Seattle's best local poet, and he joins us today. Welcome, Jesse.
Thank you.
Good to have you. How long have you been a poet? Have you been a poet all? Did you know that you were a poet from the time you could begin writing?
No. I started writing poetry seriously when I was
maybe 15 years old.
And what generally are the themes of your poetry?
Life as it appears to me.
Do you feel like you have a view of a certain slice of life?
Yeah, it's dark.
Dark.
I'm considered a very dark poet, yeah.
Dark poet.
Mm-hmm.
Let me read what the entry says in the weekly, because it talks about your, it says you have a raw narrative style and sandpapery voice. I don't think your voice sounds sandpapery, do you?
No, not now.
Do you think Seattle is a good place for poets?
Gosh, I don't know if any place is a good place for poets particularly, you know. I mean, more than one place more than another. I mean, I found, for instance, New York, which is supposed to be such an open place, it's very closed.
Huh.
It's a very closed place to try and read or communicate with people using poetry. So I was glad to get back here.
When you talk about poetry, then, you see it as a communication to people.
Yeah. Sometimes when I'm in my room, I don't see it that way. I just see it as writing on just what I do. It's my work. I get up in the morning and I write things. I work on my poems and I shuffle through papers and so on. But when I'm on a stage, yeah, it's a communication. Why else would I be there?
That's right. All right, Jesse Bernstein, thank you for being with us, and congratulations on your being voted best poet by the weekly newspaper readers.
Well, thank you to the readers of the weekly. For some reason, this feels like slow motion television. And I want you to know, as you're walking by, that this is the strangest job that I've ever had in my whole life. I'm going to read to you from my writing in a department store window. In here, it is one man, a man with a microphone. I am doing my job in here. My job is to stay on this side of the glass and talk into the microphone. You all have different jobs. If you were eating a cookie, I would say that your job was to eat that cookie. So I am very glad to see that you are all doing your jobs and doing them well. That's how it looks on this side of the glass. Well, it's lunchtime. What if you went into a crowded restaurant, sat down, ordered a sandwich and coffee, and while you were waiting to be served, the other people in the restaurant, the customers, waitresses, everyone, rearranged the tables and chairs so they could watch you eat your lunch. No one else is eating. They're just watching you, waiting for you to take the first bite, looking at how you lick the coffee off of your upper lip, waiting to see if any of the lettuce falls on your shirt.
Most of all, he loved his own work. He loved it like a baby. And he used to tell me when we were backstage and on opening night, and I'd say to him, I'd grab him and say, I can't do it, I can't do it, I can't do it, a fucking piece of shit, I can't go out there and do this, they're gonna hate me. He'd say, look, he'd say, this is your job. Can you just go out there and do your job? Just go and do your job. And to him, his art, his life was his job.
Oh, hey, boy. Come back in here and buy me one. I have got my cards in my jacket, and I am down on the old street looking for someone to play. I am cold and my shoes are turned the wrong way. Sink room's dark and the drains are plugged up with hair. Deal 'em in the light of the basement window, flushing hearts. Take off all my clothes and stand there naked, lit up from outside.
Hey, here's a biographical note by the author. S.J. Bernstein was born in the 50s and 60s in Los Angeles. He was unemployed until the age of 6. Since then, he has worked as a seeing-eye dog for the spiritually impaired and as an emergency storm drain. Disintegrating.
My name is Wilson Barnes. I'm the pastor at the Trinity Christ Memorial Baptist Church in Seattle, Washington. The music department was having a choir rehearsal, and Jesse happened to be walking through the neighborhood, and he heard the music playing and the choir singing, and so he stopped at the door. So he asked one of the sisters, Mother Stokes, if he can join the church. He was the kind of person that he was a part of you, regardless of what you thought of him, and he made you feel like that, you know, you couldn't, no way you can say no to him about anything, because he was always wanting to do something.
One night he stayed with me, and when he woke up in the morning, he said, "I don't want to leave." So I said, "Don't leave." And then a couple days later, he said, "I don't want to leave." I think my kids were climbing all over us, and we were drinking coffee and reading the newspaper, and I said, "Don't leave." And the next day, he said, "Let's get married." And I said, "Okay."
When he got married to Allison, I had this real fancy wedding in downtown Seattle, and I showed up drunk, stayed there for 3 days. I don't know, third night, I guess, he started playing some music. He was doing some song he was working out for a number, and he was down to business, and I'm sitting there at the kitchen table. I play a little blues harp, you know, so I whipped out I had this key of G that went with what he was playing. I started playing along, you know, I got my eyes closed, playing a little blues harp, feeling, oh, me and Jesse playing music, and then I hear this crash sound, open my eyes, and I'm sort of a little slow because I've been drinking for so many days, and I just see this glint. I realized, broken bottle. Next thing I know, I got Jesse in my lap, hair pulled back, broken wine bottle onto my nose, and I look up and he's crazed. And it's like, "I'm gonna cut your fucking face, you understand me? I'm cutting your fucking face off." And he's got that baby right under my nose. And it's the first time I saw the crazy Jesse, you know, where wham. I looked in those eyes and it was like pure insanity. It wasn't Jesse Bernstein that I knew. And my street experience, which I had a little of myself, was don't move, don't blink, and don't lose eye contact. So I just kept looking into those eyes, and he kept ranting, and I waited to lose that one little click, you know, and then you got to see behind that, and it was like you tell he touched bases. He touched down again. He touched bases with himself, the compassionate Jesse. And as soon as I saw that, very slowly, I just reached up and moved the bottle. I said, "Oh man, Jesse, you don't want to do that." And he went, "Yeah, well, fuck, man." And he hit the bottle against the wall, you know? And he was frustrated as all hell. He said, "This is my life."
He drank to help himself deal with the so-called mental illness, which I consider to be more accurately described as neurological. He had constant little tiny seizures, and their doctors were able to see the scar tissue on the outside of his brain where it met his skull. They had a theory that his brain was too large for his skull, and that was part of what caused the seizures. He used alcohol. When I knew him earlier, he had used narcotics to self-medicate because those little seizures made him feel crazy. What our happiness was just everyday life. Having dinner and then me going into my studio to make collages and him going into his office to write. After we'd been married a couple years, he got serious about getting sober. He thought at first that he wouldn't be able to perform again. In time, he developed a completely different way of performing, which was simply using his magnificent voice, the sense of timing that he had, to deliver the writing. Not with gimmicks, not with rolling around making a fool of himself, but just to take what he had written and somehow hand it straight into your heart with his voice.
I live on a street where there are many, many cars and trucks and factories that pump and bang and grind all night and day. It is a miracle that I can write poetry or sleep or talk on the telephone or that my lover will visit me here. There is so much noise. Every few minutes a jet comes in low or a prop job swings down like a kamikaze. There is an airport at the end of my street. The New Age people say that you choose all these things. Choose the cars and trucks and airplanes, me and all of my neighbors. Well, maybe this is true. Maybe we can't live without all this goddamn noise. Maybe I need the noise to write poems, make love, and eat. I'm going to hang a sign out my window that says, "More noise, please," or "Thank you for making noise." Maybe we are the kind of people who need to have what we don't want just to get along, to do the basic things. Myself, I could not sleep last night, and I could not close the window either. I tried to tear the window out of its frame and put it in a closed position, banging and ripping with the hammer and a screwdriver, standing on the window ledge in my socks 3 stories up. But the window wouldn't come out, and the factory was screaming, and the trucks were rumbling, and the whole world was praying for silence, and it was up to me to shut the window, and I couldn't get it down. I was just making more noise.
I wouldn't hesitate to describe Bernstein's work as being outsider art. I think it's not necessarily naive, but he was self-taught. Depending on who you talk to, he didn't make it out of high school, but I think he was a savant in many ways, and his work came from outside the mainstream in the same fashion that the early punk movement came from outside the mainstream. Jesse was dubbed the godfather of grunge by a British magazine called The Independent. Jesse was the orator of grunge. He was the erudite voice of this counterculture movement. Jesse opened for bands like Nirvana, Soundgarden, Tad, Mudhoney, just about all of the artists that would later change the face of rock music.
Jesse didn't conform to the prevailing thing or what people thought was poetry. He was driven to his art and driven by his art to try to perfect it, to try to always be better, to write something better than he'd written before, to push his abilities and where he went with it. And he was not afraid to have a very, very dark vision. All of that was very attractive to a lot of the musicians and people who were interested not only in music but in, photography and other art that had this mixture of anybody can do it and the world's a dark and depressing place. Seattle was really all about that in the 80s, so I think he fit in very well.
Here's Kurt jumping into the drum kit, which he liked to do. This is a Mudhoney audience in England at the Reading Festival. This is really about the only true kind of photo session that I had with Jesse. I have bits and pieces elsewhere. Jesse was living at the Ontario Hotel, and I was just playing a fly on the wall and kind of snapping away. And he's very comfortable with the camera. We all sort of considered ourselves outsiders to a degree in the music scene. And Jesse was a true outsider, I mean, he had tattoos on his knuckles. And, I mean, he was a little bit scary, We were college kids, really, the whole flannel. And, I mean, to a degree, there was just a sense of, play there. But Jesse was, the real thing.
Sub Pop 200 was sort of a landmark release from the label that included bands that would later become internationally famous. Jesse Bernstein had a seminal poem of his called Come Out Tonight that was anthemic. When some of these grunge bands first started to tour Europe, I would get reports back that audiences in Germany or Belgium were shouting out lyrics from Come Out Tonight. It had a real influence on this punk milieu.
I want to introduce the opening poet tonight, a great genius from Seattle, Jesse Bernstein.
This is from, it's called Come Out Tonight, and it's dedicated to Jackie Onassis. Forecast in chrome and plastic, tyrants breathing alloy of slavery, planet hunger, visions of Jackie O. Sherry, Sherry, baby, won't you come out tonight? And the stars whisper like old blood at the edges of the body of night. She stood with one hand on the phone for 4 hours, poised as though only a few seconds had passed. I watched her through the crack between the shade and the sill. She waited for a forecast in human trembling, together with other important women. Come out tonight. The world suffers for her. The clock hurries like a terrified animal and stops dribbling saliva. She has been eating chicken pie and bubble gum. For a month, the Luftwaffe lived on raisins. Same with the French after the war. Jackie O received fresh oranges from John Kennedy. Silly girl. She cannot put down the telephone receiver. She is waiting to receive my body of work. She wants to take it in her ear. A mottled flush builds under her cheeks. She eats Christmas candy while she waits. The telephone rings and rings. I am not at home. I am with Jackie O. We are eating oranges from the president. We are alone on the roof of a Park Avenue penthouse. Picture of Marilyn Monroe in my back pocket, molded by heat and sweat to the shape of my buttocks. You are gripping the phone, smiling, eating candy, crying. I am with the important women now. I am secretly an important man. Hang up the phone. I can't dance with you anymore. Go to your freezer and get a popsicle. Go to your TV, turn on your TV. You will see me and Jackie O. She will be taking it in the ear, my body of work, in the planetarium. You will receive a forecast. I will always be more important than you. You will never be important enough. You will never be on the whip hand end of slavery. Never be the one to wield hunger against humanity. Heaven will never be an extension of your body. Your body will always belong to someone else. The picture of Marilyn Monroe flutters across the roof, steaming, shaped like me, shaped like my ass. The sky is filled with oranges during the war. We eat them. The president is alone in the room. He is unimportant. As we eat his oranges, the sky grows blacker. The moon ripens and turns red. It rots and is swallowed by the darkness. You are still by the phone. It is ringing and ringing dead. Sherry, baby, won't you come out tonight? It is completely dark. The earth freezes. You put down the receiver and go to the window. Come out tonight.
Come Out Tonight. It was sort of the start of this popularity of Jesse as a rock artist. And at a certain point, Sub Pop Records contacted me because they were interested in doing this, doing a full album of Jesse's work. The concept that they'd come up with was to record something in a prison, sort of like Johnny Cash live at Folsom Prison, I think was sort of the jumping off point. When the prisoners came in, you could see that there was a tremendous level of skepticism about who this performer was. The room was just, I mean, it was cold, it was physically cold in the room, and there was no connection whatsoever between him as a performer and the inmates. The standard issue shoe that the prison gave out were Converse All-Stars. They were Chuck Taylors. So if you just kept your eyes at ground level, it kind of looked like being in a club where Jesse would normally perform, you know. So on a certain level, I felt positive. So Jesse started singing and playing songs, and 2 or 3 songs into the performance, a connection started to develop. There was some sort of innate understanding on the part of the prisoners that this guy who'd come to perform for them was actually one of them.
My eyes were opened and I saw neither lighthouse nor a ship, the sea and sky beyond the laws of fire and of life. Though there is no there is no cause for grief. Love will find us like a thief and rob us gently, rob us gently.
I've stopped trying to have a memory or pretend that I have one. And I don't have a lot of ideas about where many of these songs or poems came from, so don't try asking me later. But they're all out of some form of personal experience of some sort. Or I wouldn't have been able to write anything.
I talked to Jesse about his childhood and more his exploits as a young adult. He was not only inventing a colorful background for himself, but I think he was trying out different storylines.
When your dear mother was laid to rest, both weary hands upon her breast.
My brother was born Stephen J. Bernstein, December 4th, 1950, at 2519 Palm Grove Avenue in Los Angeles, in what's called the West Adams District. It wasn't too clear what the J stood for, so he made it Jesse. We lived with my grandfather and grandmother on my mother's side, Isidore and Lena. They were Jewish, and they came over here from the Ukraine, approximately 1908. Lena passed away when I was 5, when my mother was pregnant with Jesse. So you can picture what the scene is like. Now we're living with my grieving grandfather, and we have a new baby. My mother was very vivacious and outgoing, and she was really interested in us getting educated, and she was real interested in her social life too. My father was what you call the brilliant remote guy. He was an engineer and a machinist, but as far as relating to us, he was on a different planet. When he was 5, Jesse got polio. He needed to be rehabilitated so that he could fully use his muscles. Already at 5, he's having these very different experiences from the other kids. He started doing music first. There'd be a lot of people gathered at the house, and he'd just be plunking around on the piano, and then it would finally coalesce into something. Pretty soon, the conversation would kind of die out, and people were going, what is that? Steve was like the kid who grew up in the acrobat family, who learns to walk the balance beam at age 2, right at the same time he's learning to walk, and eventually becomes an acrobat, and he's, let's say he becomes famous, and people say, so when did you dream of being an acrobat? But there would never be a time like that for a kid like that. He just started creating. He just came online, and what he saw and what he heard came back out again. In some ways, he was the guy who goes around and turns up the contrast on everything.
I hear a child practicing their music. The trumpet, it's too sloppy to be sure.
Living next to the Bernsteins was, it was a combination of joy and trial. Steve, he was just really interesting. He wasn't like anybody else. At 5 years old, we were married. My Zadie, my grandfather, he got him to marry us with the Bible, and Steve would get down on one knee, and he would propose, and he gave me a ring, you know, like from the Jack in the Box. We'd be out all day long. It was like being in a movie, because his imagination was so fabulous. At about 9 or 10, we would get on our bikes and we'd go down to Venice Beach. We used to sneak into POP, which was Pacific Ocean Park. At that time, there was a little amusement park. One day, we rode the roller coaster 30 times. Steve seemed to know people that were, like, why he knew him, I don't know. We would go down to the beach, and he would talk to people who were poets and drug addicts and holy rollers. And so, you know, I never would have done anything like that on my own. We did a lot of listening to musicals like Shangri-La, beat poetry, and he used to listen to Tom Lear.
I ache for the touch of your lips, dear, but much more for the touch of your whips, dear. You can raise welts like nobody else as we dance to the masochism tango.
We went to school at Walgrove Elementary School, and we were best friends, but he was always the weird kid, and some of the kids would make fun of him.
In the 5th grade, I proposed to a girl named Denise Johnson out on the lunch court. White blobs of seagull and pigeon shit rained from the sky. Denise said she wanted me to propose properly between the gym and the cafeteria after school. I combed my regular boys and wiped my modern glasses. At 10 after 3, I met Denise between the 2 buildings. I was shivering and my mouth was dry and tasted horrible. I got down on my knees on the shit-splotched black top in front of Miss Johnson. My mouth was just level with her groin. I looked up at her pretty brown face and long, straight black hair. She looked down at my damp cheeks and smiled benignly. Denise, you are the prettiest, smartest girl in the whole school. Will you marry me? My insides chattered against each other as I spoke the words. My face was livid and silly. I could feel my eyeballs bulging in their bone sockets. My knees ached. Ha 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 ha! You're too ugly. You look like you've been whooped with an ugly stick. Ha 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 ha! Her face had changed to a contemptuous snarl.
Steve he took a lot of energy to be with. He was both fascinating and he took a lot of energy. And also courage, really, because to stick by him was not always easy.
In '63, I went to UCLA. My parents had gotten divorced. That left him and my mother kind of in the house together, and the tension between them was very palpable. She just was focused on, well, why can't you be predictable? You know, why do you sometimes disappear from school? Where did you go? You know, who were you seeing?
When I was about 12 years old in 1963, my father and mother were newly divorced, and my father took up folk dancing, and he met Claire, and somehow Claire and George introduced their kids to each other. My mother was an artist, and you know, Jesse really got exposed to the art world by being with us. And there was a hangout called Barney's Beanery. It was a bar, cafe, greasy spoon kind of place, and all the artists hung out there. And an artist living in LA at the time named Ed Keenholt did an installation sculpture of Barney's Beanery, and the sculpture had life-size human figures in it. They were all sitting around the bar in clothes, and their faces were made out of clocks. And my mother took us to see that, and Jesse was so excited. He was like hanging out of the car window, yelling at people, telling everyone that's where we were going. This is a classic. He's playing his guitar as usual, and we're sitting by the side of a swimming pool in Beverly Hills. Jesse introduced me to the early songs of Bob Dylan. He told me about sharecroppers and blue work shirts and all these things that were really coming into our middle-class consciousness. We would spend hours in the garage at his mom's house making collages and sculptures and talking. At that time, he was maybe 13 or 14 years old. He would get very depressed, and he would be so depressed he couldn't move.
When she would say, you have to go to school, he would spin off and spew all kinds of venom.
He wouldn't come out of the garage. He only wore this one sweatshirt, and he was eating dog food. His mother needed to do something.
She had been taking him for therapy, and they said he was schizophrenic, and they didn't know what they could do to help. So she placed him in Camarillo State Mental Hospital.
He wrote me letters from Camarillo. One of his letters was really excited. I met Phineas Newborn Jr. Phineas Newborn Jr. was a jazz piano player that was well known. As I imagine they must have had a piano there, and he was hanging out with him.
The day room is something out of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And he seemed really upset at being there. Within months, he escaped.
This clouded heart where the rain begins and the traffic dies. We cry a little because of the bricks showering from the broken buildings, the windows divided into pieces of pictures, the incomplete dirt and sallow gardens.
Let's take some big chunks of his life. There's a period from when he's a kid, say. That's part one. And that's from when he's a kid until he goes to Camarillo. And then he's not a kid anymore. And part two runs from when he's in Camarillo to when he gets to Seattle. Part two is he's a runaway.
Electric wires inside eels, nervous knives, pretty pistols, mothers, gods, fathers, cops, leaning with shame. The deteriorated winter is yellow and its cruel dust is everywhere on handled bars, stair rails, steeples, all broken off, rooftops that smell like moldy sausage.
The story was that Jesse slept under a bridge at Esalen. And there was a picture we had from a Sunset magazine or something about Esalen, and there was a picture of him sitting on the ground from the back, but it was obviously him.
I didn't hear anything from him at all for more than 6 months. And then he'd been picked up by the California Highway Patrol on some kind of psychedelics, walking along the center divider of the Pacific Coast Highway. And they wouldn't put him back in Camarillo since he'd escaped from there. So they put him in a mental facility called Norwalk. And it was much higher security than Camarillo. In some ways, it was a better place because these people were in there for short term. They weren't kids who were completely out of it, catatonics who'd been that way for years and years.
Job, never heard of a poor Jew, they said, and threw everything on the floor. My dad's in there, he's like God to me. My God's in there, he's like a dad to me. Well, give him all your cigarettes, they said. And he did time and got raped by guards and prisoners and knifed and kicked the shit out of it and went in a hole for 5 months, 3 weeks, did not cry for 9 years, which is almost $1 million.
They wouldn't release him back to my mother because of a concern she had that she was aggravating what was bothering him and there might be some violence. So they instead released him to my father. And my father had kind of all kinds of positive feelings about how he was going to bring structure to Steve's life. A lot of days he just went off, headed toward school, and then vanished. So he hitchhiked across the country to New York. And he was in Greenwich Village.
He kept going out in the world and experiencing things. Jesse came back to LA and he lived in an old hotel. He had a little tiny room by himself. He smoked cigarettes, wrote songs, did art.
Venice was a kind of a milieu he totally understood. Ken Kesey had this school bus with all this stuff painted on it. The Kool-Aid on the bus had LSD in it. And off they went in the bus one day to San Francisco.
67, Summer of Love. I was asked if I wanted to make some money and be in a porno film with Jesse Bernstein. We walked to the Tenderloin and we met this sleazy older guy, balding with a big gut and who's sweating profusely and in some crummy Tenderloin hotel. And Jesse apparently knew this person and had done it before.
Eventually, the youth authority picked him up because he was addicted to heroin. So they put him in the Synanon organization in their juvenile program in Santa Monica. He didn't like having to go to group therapy. He didn't like having to work on his high school equivalency. One day he just left Synanon. And that's the end of that part. Part 3 is, in some ways, maybe everything after that.
Oh, Mama, get me a plane ticket out of here. Oh, Mama, put me on a bus. Oh, Mama, get Daddy out of jail. How come the hole in the roof isn't big enough so I can fly out, but it's big enough so the rain can get in? And I saw you in the picture, and I saw you in the picture, and I'm not too young or too dumb to know what you was doing in the picture. I saw you in my clouded heart.
It was the late 60s in Seattle, and I was completely in love with jazz, and I was working in an after-hours jazz club called the Longolin. I was the house bass player that played for the customers that came in between 9 and midnight. One day Jesse arrived in town. He introduced himself to me when he came in the club because I was the bass player, and Jesse had been playing bass in San Francisco before he came to Seattle. He was about 16 years old, real skinny. It was winter, as I recall, and he had a huge raincoat, came to his ankles. Sleeves were about 6 inches longer than his arms. His voice was real intriguing because it had a lot of kind of slang that you'd associate with street life and jails and stuff. We all hung around this club all the time. I mean, we were there all night.
Jerry Heldman was the owner, put it together. Heather Hammond was kind of the main singer there.
The Longolin, I thought I made it up, but it turns out it means church by the lake. You know, it's right across the street from Lake Union. I wanted a place where there was room for poetry, jazz, folk music, you know, the gamut. Opened for 4 years, and we had a lot of famous musicians sit in with us. It was New Year's Eve. Jesse and I think Heather came in at the same time.
Heather had the most beautiful voice, just incredible. She was, as he, a very quiet person, but then she took a microphone, she would stop a crowd. When she and Jesse were together, pregnancy was the last thing that they expected to occur, but it did. When Heather talked to me about their plans for parenting, it was just, oh, we're gonna share, like he's gonna have him 2 weeks and I'm gonna have him 2 weeks, and it was kid stuff. And I think that, as usual, it worked out that his mother took care of him.
The Longolin shut down, so Jesse and I went out on the road.
He went out as a songwriter, lived in Portland for a while, and traveled with a group for a while writing songs.
He called himself Tansy Ragwort those days because it was a noxious weed that nobody wanted.
We went to the Goodwill one afternoon, and there was a piano sitting on the loading dock. And this guy comes wandering out of the back of the Goodwill. And he says, "Wow, you play music? You play music?" And Rube goes, "Yeah, do you?" And he says, they start pounding on the piano, blank, blank, blank. And he says, "So what do you play?" And he says, "I play guitar, I write some songs." And he was kind of a geeky looking guy. He had these big Coke bottle glasses, and his hair was all chopped off like he had cut it himself without a mirror.
Well, he was really a dense character. Really, really incredibly smart, but all underneath the surface. Didn't dress wildly, but he was very, very internalized and private. Hard to pull out, like shy, guarded to an extreme degree.
So Robin says, "Well, you want to run? Come on down to Portland. Play our breaks down at the medicine show." And I says, "Rube, boy, this guy, I don't know. I have no idea what's going to happen." And he starts playing, and I go, doesn't sound bad. And everybody's just sitting there, you know, staring at him going, what? You know, it's like they couldn't quite grasp.
He went places so musically, using chords that, you know, like they were jazz chords, I guess, but they didn't sound like jazz chords.
And after a while, they started thinking that we were going to hold him hostage, and he was being kept a prisoner. So when we went back to Seattle, he hopped off the bus, and I never really saw him again.
You know, a lot of the time when I was working at the Goodwill store with Jesse from 71 to 73, I don't know where he was living. During that time, he was studying Kung Fu, and Master Mar insisted that he have a job so that he could pay for his classes. He was working in the shoe department. I was working over in the book department. And one day he came up with this idea for a film called Mourning for Nefertiti. And this is where I was living at the time. He was intending to go to the Volunteer Park Art Museum and stand in front of a statue of Nefertiti and have a moment of awkward silence with this woman who he'd asked to go out with, and she didn't want to go out with him. He said that he kept thinking of the word moribund and this Egyptian funerary feeling. Jesse wrote me a lot of letters and lived in a lot of places. In the 70s, Jesse went from being a kid who was experimenting with a lot of different art forms to someone who was really dedicated to writing. The house on 10th is the boarding house where Jesse lived for maybe 2 or 3 years. While Jesse lived at that apartment, he would stay up all night frequently writing, and he just turned the tape recorder on with the windows open and left it running. He talks about in the gray dawn, the cacophony of bird songs. In his letters, he says he's writing a lot of poetry. Then he starts saying, well, I'm working on a book, and there are all these little pieces to it, and if I keep it organized, I can get it all put together. And I think that's what became Soon Sweet Misery, which is really his first body of work. He was spending a lot of time at the Elite Tavern then, too. A lot of those pieces in Soon Sweet Misery, they're about people he knew at the Elite. In one of the letters, he says, the main thing I'm interested in is writing, drinking, and fucking. And that was pretty much what he was doing, I think, a lot. This one is dated 4/29/77, Seattle, Dear Jeff. I think I'm going too far out on the limb. Every morning I wake up thinking, oh no, oh shit, what now? It's like being a werewolf. I'm gonna have to lay low for a while. I'm afraid I'm going nuts. Every day I say all kinds of things that I don't mean. Sometimes I walk around telling out-and-out lies on purpose. You know, I think about it beforehand. I'm going to tell so-and-so such and such, kick up a fuss. It's kinky. Sometimes I get off on bullshitting strangers. When he started doing performances, he would sort of push things, and he did it on purpose just to, like he says in the letter here, to kick up a fuss. If you want to call it what became the Jesse Bernstein legend, or the legendary Jesse Bernstein. I remember Cack talking about one reading where Jesse took down his pants in the middle of the reading, and apparently that seemed to work for him. But I kind of think he got trapped in that persona.
Jesse could write with me because I didn't demand anything from him. The Seattle art scene is very politicky and very cliquey. I realized that he was dealing with a lot of this. So I had decided that I would not be part of that world for him, so that he had a place to come where he was relaxed and didn't feel like he had to perform. By the time that I found out I was pregnant, he had flipped over to his dark side and was tattooing himself. And I was like carrying hell's baby. This was a picture of Alex moments after his birth. 4 days after Alex was born, I went down to the Oregon coast. Because basically I was pretty much in shock that I had this baby with not knowing how things were going to go or what kind of parent I was going to be. Jesse came over and asked me to marry him for the child's sake. But he had to climb up on the roof to ask me to marry him. Well, I was gardening and I said no.
He and Molly were performing. It just seemed the thing to do was videotape him. He said that he thought we should call it Buzz Bomb Productions because I was a buzz bomb. He said that he doesn't like to have relationships with beautiful women. When his mom and brother came up from LA and we were all sitting at a table, this woman reached over and said to me, "You are so beautiful." And Jesse looked at me and I thought, that's a nail in my coffin. He wrote to me a lot on his books. he would always sign it, "Love, Jesse." And so we were going to meet at a party. And so I thought maybe I could tell him I loved him. I said, "I love you." And at the party, he met Allison. And she said to him, "Well, you ready to leave?" And he said, "Yeah." And he left with her. And that was the end of our relationship.
How can you love that? And I looked at that woman, and through the goddamn machine on the bed, we were in this awful room, my room. Hey, why don't you take these? They were the keys to her apartment, and get out of here. She was a very tall woman, and the tears hung from her face like oriental swords. Now it's just one silly thing after the other. A few poems, a piece of ass, a couple of eggs, a cigarette, a little burning passion. I can't explain it.
He did a tattoo on my elbow when we had overdone it one night. We got terribly high. And he said, "Now I've got to sign it." And I said, "Okay, man, go ahead, man." And so he signed it. That was one of the stupidest things I have ever done.
So Pete says when he wears his shirt halfway up, he hates that people think he's a Jesus freak.
Can I roll my shirt down?
At some point, Jesse went to New York
to see William S. Burroughs.
Must have been about 81 or 82.
Burroughs had suggested that he should set the words to music. We had a pretty regular collaboration, so we wouldn't really read through it first. He'd open his mouth and I'd catch the key and the rhythm and we'd be off. And usually it was the same way every time.
Now she is in another country, two countries at the same time at once. When there are no postcards, there's always a voice.
We might get slaughtered by a critic, or we might get stiffed on a job, or we might not be able to make the rent, or, you know, whatever. You could complain about it and laugh about it, but the last line was always, "Do your job, man. I mean, do your job."
I was opening an exhibit at Roscoe Louis Gallery, and he came up and asked me in the course of this opening if he could give a reading, a short performance. And I said, sure, why not? So he stood in the middle of the gallery underneath an 8-foot replica of a MiG Russian jet fighter and started shrieking at the top of his lungs about his days as a hitman in San Francisco.
The arrangement of things, the argument against the body, warring bodies, corroding wires of habit in the cold brain.
He went to all these open mics and he would read his poetry to these people who were talking about flowy, graceful, beautiful metaphors. He just kept going and he kept reading in front of these people, even though, like, I'm sure he was like a two-headed alien to them.
You all right? My name is Twinkie. I live with a writer. His name is Jesse Bernstein. I'm a lot smarter than he thinks. He's so patronizing. I am trying to teach Jesse how to talk. We're making progress. Actually, I'm not interested in making it in the literary world. But if I could get Jesse going in the right direction, maybe, you know, he's capable of learning. We could get some kind of an act together.
Here's Jesse with a mouse in his mouth, reading. Remember, that concert got somewhat protested by animal rights people, but actually, Jesse was very nice to the mouse. In fact, he gave it writing credit. Choking on Sixth is Jesse's first published book of poetry, I believe. And it was published by a stripper that asked Jesse why he didn't publish a book, and he said he didn't have the money, so she went out in the parking lot, and an hour later came back with enough money to publish his first book.
He always had several things going on. He was writing novels, writing short pieces, is a playwright, an actor, a director,
It was just astonishing, the amount of work that he created. Jesse was able to move amongst different disciplines with great ease. He was a bit of a chameleon, though he never really changed his colors. So many different groups of people would sort of adopt him and claim him to be their own.
She's going to split it open and eat your brains. That's really going to hurt a lot. She might eat all the nerve endings that are the pain ones.
That'd be great.
I've got speed.
Gorefest, shot hound, fork 2, take 2. 3, 2, 1.
Blood, lots of blood. Please help me out, Derek. That's a cut.
Okay, let's go.
I'd like to have a child.
You know, natural childbirth is no longer allowed. Like I say, writing is very draining, and performing is very draining. People think that that these things feed you. In fact, these are things that you put out of yourself, and you keep putting them out, and you put it out on paper, and then you go on a stage somewhere and put out some more. Well, where do you get put in? Where does the stuff come from? It can only come from other people, from being with other people. But how do you get with other people when your job is being by yourself? You're by yourself at the typewriter, you're by yourself on the stage, you're by yourself in your bed. Where does it come from?
A scorched flower rested on my forehead. A bottle of pills rattled as I walked from one end of the dance floor to the other. You could tell I was sick. No one wanted to dance with me that night. But how long was the night?
I came up to Seattle looking for something to photograph, and I ran into Jesse, and he said, oh, come up to my hotel room. He was living at the Scargo Hotel then. It was one of those little tiny rooms with a bed. Then he had his little hot plate. He was a huge encouragement to me when I was just starting out. He was a little bit older, and so we all looked up to him as being sort of a leader in a certain kind of way. He'd starred in porno movies, and, you know, he'd been like a junkie, and he'd done like all these like sort of walked on the wild side. Even though like I personally never was that wild, I had really enjoyed hearing about it.
You're being recorded. You need to say the date, time.
Today's the 19th of September. Time is 9:20 p.m. So I had a dream, and the dream was that me and Gordon went shoe shopping in a shopping mall, and he began playing tennis in a bank. There was a woman there. She was nude, and she wanted to dance with me. And when I woke up, all of the terrible conflicts that had been torturing me lately were completely relieved.
There was a band of artists in Seattle who got together and they decided they wanted to live together in a communal type situation, and they found an abandoned building. The upstairs was SCUD, Subterranean Cooperative of Urban Dreamers. Hugo Piotin decided that we would have a cafe downstairs. Hugo had this video of this strange-looking guy with a mouse in his mouth, and I thought, what a fucking pretentious asshole this guy is. After that, Jesse came into Free Mars every single day. And all of us that worked there, we ended up giving him a sandwich every day, hence the Bernstein sandwich on the Free Mars menu. 2 cheeses, Swiss, raw milk cheddar, blue or cream cheese, cucumber, tomato, lettuce, Mystic mayonnaise, and sprouts. Mmm.
A place like a restaurant is some place where people go to get fleshed out a little bit. Basically, I come down here and fill my tanks and go back up there and sit and write some more. And then come down here and fill my tanks again and then go up there and sit and write.
We used to meet in this cafe, and he had told me that he wanted to talk to me about a film project. And I mean, I liked him, but I was more interested, I thought I was more interested in the job, in the work. And then one day I came home and I saw a big package in the mailbox, and I opened it up, and it was this folder, and it said Dear Leslie on it, and I thought, wow. It just has a title that says Poem for L number 3. I want to see your car drive up level with my window, pull up close and park next to the sill. Then I want you to get out of the car, climb in the window, and get under the covers with me. The bed is right next to the window. You don't drink coffee, I drink coffee. I would make a pot of tea for you and a pot of tea for me. I would put the 2 pots and the 2 cups on the table next to the bed. We would stay in bed until we were crazy. Then we would get up.
What I might want to drink?
Yeah, tea.
Tea?
I would take out the big board and the watercolors. We would make pictures of the animals we imagined each other to be. We would paint until our imaginations were tired. Then we'd go back to bed. The pictures would dry on the board. The animals, standing on their artistic legs, would walk all over the room, acting as they imagined you and I would act if we were them. This is my favorite picture, and it's a really old picture of Jesse, and he's about 22, 23. And this is, I really don't know when this is, but when I look at this picture, I see him when he's not feeling well. That's very familiar to me.
I'd never make it on network TV.
We talked on the phone all the time. We talk about his veins and hepatitis, his brain, and it's actually kind of frightening.
There was my brain on film, perfect resolution. There it was, this place called the Uncas. It was all pushed off to one side. I was so bummed out when I went into the hospital this time. I wanted them to give me shock treatments.
That just makes you forget for a little while.
I wanted to forget for a little while.
I've often wondered if he had a personality disorder, multiple personalities. I don't know that much about bipolar, but Jesse had a very clear-cut sequence of people that he would go through. I think we all have different people residing inside of us. It's just being able to dig them out and to communicate with them. The similarities between Alex and Jesse were just kind of undeniable. This is one of my favorite pictures. But I got one mug shot of the 3 Bernstein boys together. Damon would frequently come to the house, sometimes stay at the house. This is a picture of the 3 of them picking their nose. Family togetherness.
Maybe would a back rub help?
It might.
I can try it. Is that
Just
okay?
take this and that,
Back rub,
and
okay.
we'll have a back rub.
Did I do that? Where is it?
Lower back. The worst spot's actually on the left.
Tell me if I'm hurting you.
You kidding? I hurt already. You're not making it any worse, I can tell you that. Go down. There you go.
Yeah, so I would say take 4 of those. Night and day. I mean, you know,
Completely
Damon
different.
and me. I had 2 residences.
His entire
for the
childhood.
entire up until I was 17 and a half. Damon, you probably had
dozens. And
30
some of them were not.
residences.
And some of them were not regular residences. I mean, I lived in vehicles, tents. We lived one time at the beginning of winter, at the beginning of the school year, my mom decided to move us out of a perfectly good house into a teepee and an old Army 10-man tent.
You made it through quite a bit in spite of not having somebody around. So when Claire passed away, we went to her house. I mean, we had to clean out her stuff.
About 6 weeks ago, Stephen came to me and said that he had on 3 occasions wanted to kill me, and on one specific occasion sat in his room with a knife in hand waiting for me to enter the room. He was worried that he might have killed me had I walked into his room, as he had made the plan so clear in his mind how he would rip my gut.
It just says history of the patient, name of person giving history, Claire Bernstein.
When Stephen was 7.5 years old, 1 year after separation of his parents, he had a severely violent outburst in which he destroyed the dollhouse, smashed windows in the dollhouse and family home. It was an act of such utter and complete violence that police were called before I could be reached. He finally broke into sobs and told his reasons. He was expecting his father to come by that evening to say goodbye. He was moving the next day to Seattle, Washington. He knew his father was moving for some time, but made practically no comment on it.
He had this really painful emotional thing going on with his father. Like he was, he wanted his father to be more present. He wanted more interaction. Even though his father was violent, he obviously had some kind of mental problems himself. His father was unstable, and yet he wanted more interaction. And for me, it's just been very different. I mean, I've been fortunate that some people have stepped in and tried to fill the gap. And I would say I'm thankful to my father for just stepping back and saying, I'm just going to let Alex find something better. I'm going to stay out of it and, not afflict him with my own problems. It's really bizarre, but his absence is kind of his presence in a sense. I'm just giving you a 1, 1, 2.
I met someone, but I don't know her name. It's true, when she was born, her parents didn't name her nothing at all.
He came into the Sub Pop offices and we went out to lunch. And I found him to be a master storyteller. He riffed on his personal life at length for an hour. And by the end of that hour, he had convinced me that his mother was an opera singer and that his father generated a small fortune through the invention of the plastic strawberry basket. And we saw him as an integral part of the rock culture, even though he wasn't playing rock music.
This is a show of Jesse Bernstein performing at the Georgetown Steam Plant in 1987. It was the final concert of a real influential band from Chicago called Big Black. So it was pretty amazing that that number of people were that attentive to this very odd reading of his cut-up novel personal effects.
Open valves, water spills, and hard lumps from bright plumbing. Flush excrement, blood, slash a wriggling spore into trap. Wire mesh droops in long, slimy strings. Turns to silver gray mush down trap vent in warm enamel. What's the music? This is music, asshole.
That little clip was sampled by Big Black, who, between every song, replayed that clip. This is music, asshole. This show was The passing of the torch between the sort of East Coast punk milieu to the burgeoning Seattle sound.
This is music, asshole!
The original idea for Prison was to perform in front of prisoners. And it originally was just going to be spoken word. I remember going to prison with Jesse, and he did the show. The tapes, I don't think really held up very well. So we scrapped that idea and we thought, okay, we're going to go back. We're going to work with the music producer Steve Fisk and layer some loops behind the spoken word.
Can you cry? I cannot cry.
Bruce and I had known each other for a long time, and he knew I did, collage stuff, and I worked with beats and loops. Ultimately, what he ended up doing was recording everything himself in his home studio.
The old gangster in me comes out, my hands are two pistols.
No Man and kind of a rough version of More Noise Please were completed to a point where he could hear what was going on, and told me that it was great and wanted me to, go ahead and just treat the rest of the stuff however I wanted to. He was very clear about, he was used to collaborating with people and didn't want to get in my way, and just was sort of giving me all the upfront carte blanche kind of stuff. And then no one realized that he was getting ready to dump the project.
This is Sockeye from Nia Bay. And it's from the Macaw Fleet. Fresh today.
One of the big things Jesse would like to have done was every minute of his day being on videotape.
What I was gonna do is come over here.
That'd be like brushing his teeth naked in a, empty bathroom to, hitting the streets, clubbing, or doing his show, or maybe just sitting down writing. We'd done one-on-one type of discussions and just let the camera roll.
And now speak to us about thrust. I guess that's how I feel about the world. It is thrust upon me. Thrust into the fire.
Being the video guy, I kind of didn't capture that other than on tape, where he was really going with a lot of his ideas or his depression.
Jesse stayed clean and sober for 9 years, with occasional 2-week hospitalizations when the illness got bad. Over the years, it seemed to get worse. In some despair at being forced to choose between having all his attention absorbed by the illness or having to take psycho drugs, which made it just as difficult for him to write. He began to abuse narcotics again, and then he began to drink.
Frog Prince here. I work the swamp. I'm working the swamp now. I'm going to croak you out a few things.
Tell us a little bit about Lilyville. What is it?
Oh, it's a smelly place.
Lilyville, where all the froggies come from.
It's the place where all the froggies come home to roost. Here we go. Here, we're in Lilyville now.
Lilyville.
Jesse had called himself, he was the frog, because the frog is the storytelling spirit that we usually see on our totem poles.
Rocket, come on.
Let's make love. Let's make everything new.
Nia Bay's all the way out on Highway 112, so there's only one road going in and coming out. Jesse wanted to, he really wanted to release, and getting away from Seattle was one way of doing it. Giving it over to nature for both of us was a good thing. Last night we were with my cousin at his trailer, and I think we had some smoked fish, and we were talking. When I did go to bed, everybody just settled down, and I remember sometime early in the morning when it was still dark, I heard the stove being stoked, and I knew Jesse had decided to stay up there in the living room and just hang out. My cousin got up in the morning, and I heard him walk past the door because it's a corridor type of trailer, and he shouted at me from the living room there, "Ray, come in here," and it was like a really violent scream, and so I just jumped out of bed and ran in there, and he was standing, he's a pretty large guy, he was standing in the doorway, and well, he moved back, and I got around him, and there was Jesse.
When I arrived at Mr. Corpus's trailer, and Mr. Bernstein was found in a kneeling position, sort of leaning back like this, on his knees in the center of the kitchen area amongst a lot of clutter, and the area was bloody from injuries from his, he had caused cuts or slices to his throat and neck area, which he bled out, and there's a lot of blood spatter and blood all about him, and he had blood down the front of him as well. And in his hand, he still had a buck knife style of a knife, a folding knife, lockback knife, and it appeared that he used to do the cutting.
Where he had bled, there was a hole in the floor, and underneath there, I guess there was a little bit of a water runoff, maybe a freshwater stream underneath the trailer, and so he bled out the trailer and through the hole out to the water.
There was a kind of tendency to want to remember him and reflect upon him as if he were some kind of like an extraterrestrial or something. But he wasn't. My experience of him was he was Huckleberry Finn with just a little bit of additional chili pepper added on top. But in, another century, he just would have been the guy that got on his horse and rode off to the west. You didn't hear from him again until he came back with a bag of gold nuggets.
Around
highways unraveling. So let's go for a ride around the old neighborhood. Peek over the fences into the backyards. Let's pretend that we're children. Let's pretend that it's true. Let's pretend that we're sweethearts.